After going down by as many as 14 points in the third quarter, the Knicks stormed back in San Antonio to take Game 1 of the NBA Finals. And while Jalen Brunson's clutch shot making stole the headlines, it was New York's defense that completely flipped the game. They held the Spurs below 100 points for the first time in these playoffs. So what did they do to slow them down, and why was it so effective? In today's video brought to you by PrizePicks, we're going to break down everything. One point of emphasis I was looking out for heading into the series was whether or not the Knicks would be able to contain the Spurs in transition. They exceeded all expectations in Game 1. You could tell that San Antonio wanted to push after every miss. Not only did the Knicks get back and get set, they did so without leaving any gaps to attack. That started with cross-matching. Instead of thinking about matchups, everyone would take the closest man. That way they could stop the ball without leaving anybody open. Here's a great example. Wemby beats Cat down the court and they don't want to risk him getting free on a cut, so OG takes the matchup while Alvarado stops the ball and everybody else, Cat included, closes to a shooter. Of course, the downside of cross-matching is that sometimes you'll have to give up a big mismatch, such as Landry Shamet on Wemby, to which they post him up, draw help, and Julian Champagnie finds himself with a wide open three. For the most part though, I think they did a great job of hustling back and avoiding those mismatches, but more importantly, their execution away from the ball was nearly flawless. It was clear that priority number one was to take away the rim. When Brunson steps in front of Castle, all they need is for him to slow him down long enough for help to get there. After committing to the paint, they'd fan out to shooters, not let them step into threes. They wanted to make the Spurs beat them in rotation, and they were rotating on a string. Anytime the ball got near the paint, somebody was there. No matter how many times they made the right extra pass, somebody was getting out to close that space. They did maybe the best job we've seen of any team at slowing the push and forcing them to play in the half court, which really stands out in the numbers. On average, teams in these playoffs have had an offensive rating of 113 after grabbing a live defensive rebound. Through the first 3 rounds, the Spurs were scoring 134, far and away the best of any team to make it past 5 games. In Game 1 against the Knicks, though, these opportunities didn't exist, falling over 40 points below their average. In the half court, they gave the Wemby assignment to Cat, who came with non-stop pressure and physicality. On the perimeter, he did a great job of sliding his feet and turning his hips to keep Wemby in front of him. From there, his sturdy frame and length could take care of the rest. Defending these isolations was a team effort though. This time he plays from an empty side and Josh Hart comes way over from the weak side to play a baseline drive. What I'm more focused on though is the middle of the floor. As soon as he attacks, Brunson stunts at the ball. They wanted to keep him as far away from the basket as possible. By nature of being 7'5", his handle is going to be on the looser side. In space, his length breaks the game. But as long as Cat is able to cut off the initial angle, that simple stunt at the ball can be enough to completely turn away a drive. Here's a great example. Again, he plays from an empty side and Cat doesn't let him get baseline. Instead of doubling, Shamet sits in the gap. Wemby isn't comfortable taking that dribble through traffic, so he gets stuck in an awkward spot, then tries to use a long stride to manufacture something out of nothing. Regardless of how Victor started his attack, whether it was catching the ball on an empty side or bringing it up as the point, they'd plug the gaps, stun at drives, and take away his space without conceding high-quality shots to his teammates. And it was the exact same thing when he started closer to the basket. Here he tries to post up, and Mikal cheats way over from up top without committing to a double. He gets back to Castle in time to not leave him with space to attack. They're not as worried about the three-point shot. When it comes to Wemby's offensive package, he still has a long way to go as a self-creator. After all, he's 22 years old, and at this point, he still relies on his length to be a game breaker. But like I said, the Knicks plugging the gaps, for the most part, made that a non-factor. That left him with one option, trying to beat them with jumpers. And those are the shots that most teams are willing to live with. In Game 1, he shot just 1 of 7 from mid-range and 2 of 9 from 3. That's not going to cut it. And in many ways, that's an extension of what we've seen throughout the playoffs. According to Synergy, on average, teams in the playoffs are generating about 0.95 points per isolation, pass-outs included. Wemby throughout this run has hovered a little under 0.85, meaning over the course of 100 possessions, his isolations are scoring about 10 points below average. All that's to say he's at his best without the ball, and that's because of his threat as a finisher. Within their offense, that mostly means pick and roll, to which the Knicks once again did an incredible job of keeping him away from the basket and forcing them to look elsewhere. That also started with Cat. They had him up near the level of screens in a high drop coverage. His job was to not let San Antonio's guards turn the corner and create straight line drives. But there's a lot more going on here. The Spurs went to a ton of 3-man actions. The Knicks approached that by having the on-ball defender fight over screens, while the third guy tags early, bumping Wemby on the roll to slow him down. Meanwhile, the low man is coming way over from the corner with a second tag. Everything was about protecting the rim. The goal with these three-man actions was to get Wemby rolling behind Cat to compromise the weak side, but the Knicks were nearly flawless with their timing, tagging and recovering to not get forced into rotation. With no advantage created, Wemby has to go one-on-one, and Cat once again wins that battle with his strength. Here's another one that starts in that horn setup with two high ball screens. Cat picks up the ball and Shamet tags early to slow the roll. As Wemby gets closer to the basket, McBride comes with a second tag, then fouls him to prevent a lob. Like I said, they were hell-bent on protecting the rim, at all costs, from both the ball and the roll. That meant the corners were vulnerable at times, but that's the poison they picked. It came with both positives and negatives. This time when they set up double drag and Wemby slips early, the low man has to commit. Castle makes a great skip pass and Champagne's left with a corner three. Speaking of which, Champagne shot 5 of 6 from 3 in the first half. When it came to New York's aggressive style of help, he was San Antonio's counter. In the second half though, I think they did a way better job of not overcommitting unless absolutely necessary. This time Robinson's the one dropping back while Brunson tags early, but I want you to focus on Shamet. He positions himself perfectly in between his man and the roll. Then as soon as he sees the paint is protected, he gets back to the corner. The Spurs are forced into an awkward spot and end up turning the ball over. Not even half a minute later, we saw it again. Shamet cheats way over without committing, and the pass comes early, but he closes out in time. Instead of an open corner three, they get a semi-contested one from above the break. That's not to say the Spurs didn't get any good looks. With that level of rim pressure, you're always going to be able to force aggressive help and open up the three-point line. They couldn't buy a jumper. As a team, they shot 11 of 43, or below 26% from 3. I'd be surprised if that isn't their worst outside shooting game of the series. It's important to keep in mind though that this is what the Knicks were willing to give up. Everything was built around not letting Wemby get open in the paint. If he wanted to find his own shot, he'd have to pop. Like I said, he shot just 2 of 9 from 3. The Spurs tried going to a few different alignments in hopes of getting him free down low. This time they empty a side of the court and have Wemby roll towards the baseline. With nobody to tag from the corner, Cat's forced to play 1-on-2, and that's how they open up the lob. The Knicks were prepared to cover these setups though. Anytime the Spurs went to an empty corner pick and roll, they'd push the ball towards the sideline. That meant Wemby instead had to roll down the middle of the paint, where they're waiting to meet him with help from the weak side. Nothing at the rim and nothing easy on the perimeter. In the third, the Spurs adjusted by emptying the wings and running pick and roll with a flat baseline. Notice how intentional the player positioning is. They made sure the 2 smallest defenders were the ones in position to help at the rim. Either Fox or Wemby should be able to finish through traffic if needed, but Hart's stunt at the ball makes Fox gather early, forcing a tougher look. About a minute later, they went to a traditional spread pick and roll. Like clockwork though, the low man cheats over, recovers to a skip pass, and the Spurs have to reset without an advantage. Then Harper tries to go one-on-one, but McBride turns him away, and the shot they end up with is a contested corner 3 from Wemby. That's a win for the Knicks. Clearly, the Spurs needed to find a way to get Wemby the ball closer to the basket. Having him run the point didn't work. Isolations were a non-factor, and no matter how they set up pick and roll, the Knicks neutralized him as a scorer. However, Mitch Johnson still had one more counter up his sleeve. But before we talk about that, I want to take a second to thank PrizePicks for sponsoring today's video. If you know you can play responsibly and you have the means to do so, PrizePicks is America's #1 app for sports picks. So if you're looking for a place to get in on the finals, use code HMA and get started. In Game 1, Brunson got up 31 shot attempts. It's obvious that the Spurs are comfortable letting him empty the clip and he's not shy. I'm expecting another aggressive game too, so I'm taking him for more than 25.5 points. On the other side, with how much attention they're sending to Wemby, it feels like you can't go wrong with any of his teammates. The guy I think they'll lean on is Stephon Castle, who's averaging 19 points a game in the playoffs. I've got him scoring more than 11.5. And it's that simple. Find the stat you want, pick more or less, and you've got your lineup. If you sign up for PrizePicks with code HMA and play $5, you get $50 in lineups instantly. So either download the app or click the link in the description to get started and let me hear your picks down in the comments. In the second half, the Spurs switched up their approach. Instead of having Wemby screen, they started having him run around screens like a 7'5" off-ball wing. The Knicks kept going with what worked. Anytime Cat got screened, they'd have the low man tag early. Then he'd recover to the corner to not give up a 3. Barnes tries to attack the closeout, but gets turned away at the rim. And Wemby once again has to beat his matchup one-on-one, which he couldn't do. One action they really like to run is having Brunson's man set a down screen for Wemby to curl towards the ball. They know the Knicks aren't going to switch, but with the way they pack the paint, he still has to win with a jumper. When using Wemby like a wing though, it's less about his scoring and more about the way he creates space. Because while they're occupied with that action, the middle of the floor is wide open, which Castle takes advantage of by playing one-on-one himself and using his physical tools to bully his way to the paint. As long as Cat's on Wemby, he's not in position to help. In these spots, everything would be about the Knicks' ability to contain drives. Against the Spurs, that's not an easy task. I'm not sure they could have done any better. Just like against Wemby, it was all about plugging the gaps, stunting at the ball, and recovering to take away the three-point line. At the point of attack, they just needed their defenders to close off the initial angle, and they were great across the board, whether it was Landry Shamet, Josh Hart, or of course Cat not letting Wemby create advantages in space. A big part of their ability to contain the ball was that they didn't give up any switches. If Brunson's man set a screen, he'd show and recover. The Spurs weren't going to find mismatches. If they wanted to play one-on-one, they'd have to beat the best defenders. Take this play from the fourth. They flatten the baseline and have Champagnie set a ball screen. What they want is for Brunson to switch on to Castle. His hedge forces Castle to take a wide driving angle, which buys Hart time to get back in front. That's exactly how you avoid a mismatch without letting the offense gain an advantage. All that's to say, everybody had trouble creating, whether it was in isolation, some guard-to-guard action, or the pick and roll. So down the stretch, they leaned on Wemby. Their late-game offense was all about putting him in position to attack his matchup one-on-one. And with the game in his hands, the Spurs just couldn't get it done. We were right back to where we started. Wemby versus Cat, one-on-one. And Cat absolutely dominated the matchup. In 45 plays as the primary defender, he held Wemby to just 9 points on 2 of 11 shooting with 5 turnovers. That was the difference. And like I said, it was a team effort. From start to finish, this was a monster defensive performance. Their execution was nearly flawless. They took away everything the Spurs wanted to do. As a result, they held them to an offensive rating of just 96, which is almost 20 points worse than their playoff average, and by far their worst game of this run. That started with taking Wemby out of the game individually. He shot 6 of 21 from the field and turned the ball over 6 times. That's how the Knicks won his minutes and won the game. Because when you get stops, you can afford lackluster offensive play. The Knicks struggled to score for most of the game, until it was time to close things out in the clutch. Their defense put Jalen Brunson in position to bring the win home, and he more than delivered, walking that San Antonio defense down and scoring 13 fourth quarter points. Between his clutch play, Josh Hart's contributions across the board, Cat's huge third quarter, and of course their defense, the Knicks continued their tour de force with a 12th straight win. From here on out, they have home court advantage, and they're 3 wins away from the first New York championship in 53 years.